Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate your listening and sharing with our investigations into all things strange and wonderful. We really do want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing introduction. You can find him and his lovely wife, Deb, if you Google Ken Quiethawk or Native American storytellers. They're out there on the Internet, and they are preservers of an amazing ancient tradition that has brought wisdom and insight to many who haven't had the options to read textbooks that were written by people who are so far in the past that they have become ancient before their time. But that's another show. Nearly every ancient culture has legends of ancient visitors who came from the stars. These visitors brought knowledge, advances in technology, and sometimes chaos to the primitive inhabitants of Earth. The best preserved of these legends are embedded in South American lore and in sacred wisdom, passed from generation to generation in Native American traditions. The Hopi tribe, for example, has a detailed and complex mythology involving what appear to be aliens. The Hopi also have specific prophecies involving a return of these visitors. Visitors from the Hidden Realms, the book we're going to talk about initially tonight, details many of these ancient South American and Native American legends and compares them to the modern reports of UFO sightings, strange appearances of unusual people bearing important messages, and alien abductions. Brent Raynes, who has investigated UFO reports since 1967, presents a multitude of previously unpublished UFO cases and abductions and shows how these seem to be directly related to the visitations reported by modern shamans. He also presents the thoughts of some of the most important thinkers in the field of ufology and reaches remarkable and surprising conclusions about the visitors. He's met and or interviewed most of the major figures in American ufology, including numerous abductees and key researchers, including Betty Hill, John Keel, Brad Steiger, Uri Geller, and many others. Since his earliest involvement in the field, he has edited and published Alternative Perceptions, a magazine producing over 70 issues, which is now online, so check that one out. He's also written chapters and sections in several books on UFOs and Native American lore. Those of you who know me know that this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. So I welcome Brent to the show. Welcome, Brent. I'm glad you're here.
Well, thank you, Barbara, for that great introduction. And when that was originally written, I might add that we're now over 250 issues of alternate perceptions.
I have a really old bio.
But that's okay. I can bring it up to date. And, of course, the alternate perceptions is now at apmagazine.info if anybody wants to check that out later. But thank you very much for having me on again. It's always great to talk with you, and we just had a conversation a few days ago. We talked for a good hour. We could have made a show out of that, I think. But anyway, we just laid the groundwork, I think, actually.
We could have, for sure. So everybody has their own, and as we said just earlier, that UFOs have been around. There's really not a question as to whether there are UFOs. They are unidentified flying objects. So UFOs, with that definition, have been around forever, and they're not anything to be frightened of or scared of or anything like that. But when did everybody has their own story about how they became involved, how they became intrigued by them? So how did you become obsessed with them?
Yeah, and I did become obsessed. Initially, I wasn't intending to become obsessed. I was, quite young, and as a young man, my interests generally skipped around a lot. I mean, at one time I was into dinosaurs after my parents took me as a young boy at the Smithsonian Institute, and I saw these big, giant fossil remnants of the, I remember the triceratops and the giant pterodactyls and all this. They were up on the wall, and trying to imagine how they must have looked. And I even remember wandering off into a section where they had all these drawers. You could pull out the drawers, and there were all these artifacts. I don't think I was supposed to be in that room, but anyway, it was
probably not.
It was quite yeah, probably not. It was quite fascinating though, but then I had a little playhouse, as a kid, and that my dad built, and I used it for an observatory. I call it the Earth Station, and had a little hole cut out, a little telescope, and I would, see Venus on the horizon and study it, and the moon and stuff. And so anyway, after the March 1966 wave that hit the country, and of course, Michigan was the main area where it concentrated. That's when, in fact, Dr. Hynek, there was a press conference, and he speculated about swamp gas, and immediately all these journalists ran for the phones and called their editors. Today, of course, they would get on their cell phones and contact them. But anyway, Michigan wasn't the only place. We had sightings up in Maine, where I'm originally from, and my dad and I would, sometimes kind of skywatch a little and see if we could see anything strange. There was a sighting that month up in Bangor, Maine, and it was a gentleman by the name of John King. He said that he had seen a disc-shaped, metallic-looking domed craft, a classic flying saucer, just maybe a foot over the ground. He fired at it with a pistol, and he fired about 4 shots at it, and at least 2 of them he heard a ping, ping sound. And he was convinced that it was probably an alien spaceship. He contacted the police about the report. And so we had some pretty good activity in our own state of Maine back at that time. Of course, I live in Tennessee now. Been here since '77. But I've, what started out in probably around January 1967, when I remember clipping something out of the newspaper, I started collecting the information. And what had happened was I read Flying Saucers Serious Business by Frank Edwards, which was really a big bestseller at that time. And, I just thought that this is real interesting. I want to look into it, collect all the clippings and magazine articles, books I could, and there just ended up being no end to it. After, I guess, a couple of years, I started mimeographing a little newsletter I called Sauceritis, and then I wanted people to know that I took it serious, so I called it the Scientific Sauceritis Review. And I had quite a few readers across the country for a couple, 3 years. I even had consultants. My ABSM consultant was Lauren Coleman, who used to live in Illinois, and now he's in Maine himself, Portland, Maine, where he has a museum, Cryptozoology Museum. And Tom Adams, he became quite popular in the field, involved with the cattle mutilation phenomena, had a magazine called Stigmata. He passed away, I think, about 3 years ago. I used to correspond with him. Lucius Farish, who started the Eureka Springs conference. tried to get John Keel. I started corresponding with him back in October '69, and we exchanged some pretty good letters, and we swapped newsletters. Mine for his Anomaly magazine, which was pretty interesting. But he turned me down on being a consultant. He said he more or less said he was more private, and he didn't want to be a member of any organization out there. He kind of kept to himself. So anyway, but that's how I got started, and eventually I really was impressed with John Keel because of the fact that he had gone out into the field, traveled through about 20 states, and I thought that sounded like a real adventure. So later on I traveled through, a lot of states myself. Over the years, it's been over 20. But I traveled from Maine to Florida about the entire summer of 1975, and there was a young lady I met down here in Tennessee, and that's how I ended up here in 1977. We got married, and I now call this home. So to make a long story short.
Well, I think it's fascinating how people are affected by flying saucers. Some absolutely deny they exist. Others are terrified by them. Others, I told you once that when one landed on my campus, I was in a group of girls because, of course, we were all hanging out the window staring at what was going on. There were people who stood right next to me that panicked, and a couple of people fainted, and then later said they didn't know what they saw. They didn't see anything. They just fainted. And then others who were hysterical, hiding in closets, and others who stood right next to me and saw nothing, and I saw this huge object blank out the sky. And I've often been very fascinated by how their presence or their existence affects people differently. And I have, and it's my opinion only, so I have to preface everything I say with this is my opinion. It's not carved in stone any place, and I can possibly change it tomorrow given half a chance. But I have experienced that those people who are drawn to them, who are intrigued by them, who are touched by them, there is a shift in their consciousness that is really quite profound. And it has nothing to do with level of intelligence. It has to do with conscious awareness. And I found that it opened up a tremendous platform of extrasensory type stuff that becoming more intuitive, becoming more insightful, nothing that I could, pin a label on or make a living at. But it did change the way that it changed my life profoundly. And I lived for decades with people saying, "Oh yeah, you're the one that saw the flying saucer. How much did you have to drink that night?" And it was really, usually when you get abuse like that, you keep quiet and you don't talk about it. But when it comes to this kind of experience, knowing you're going to be ridiculed, you still go ahead and talk about it, which to me is stupid, but I did it anyhow. And then probably 20 years ago, somebody published a book called In Focus, and it was about photographs of UFOs, and the one site, and it was a report on authenticated UFO sightings, and the one at my college was one of them, and it was like, after all these years, I've been vindicated, and now I can't find any of those people that ridiculed them to go, "Told you so." So, but it was a great experience for me. It was very exciting. It was not, I wasn't scared at all. And, you show me a skunk walking towards me, and I will show you fear. But this disc flying over my head didn't scare me at all. So probably maybe because it was leaving, but So I'm often fascinated by what is it in the people that are fascinated by it, whether or not they see one or not. Patrick Cook was my husband, and he had a huge website on the Bible UFO connections. He had never seen a UFO, and yet he studied them in depth. I mean, he was crazy into them, but he had never seen one. So that just the mere existence of them shifted his consciousness somehow. So I don't know even if that was the intention of whoever originated them, but it seems to have been a light switch that is turned on in many people's consciousness about the possibility of there being not just this world, but a cosmic community out there someplace.
I remember reading years ago the well-known in the field psychologist, Wyoming psychologist, Dr. Arleo Sprinkle, who's had a couple of UFO sightings himself early on, I think back in the late 40s and then 1956, I believe, out in Wyoming. And those two sightings kind of, although he wasn't really into UFOs and a big believer in the beginning, those experiences kind of warmed him up to it. And then he later joined APRO as a consultant, and he became someone who had conferences, hypnotized experiencers, did regression hypnosis, and he come up with the idea that a lot of the people are evolving from like planetary citizens to cosmic citizens. They begin to change in their focus about things, and it affects them where instead of just being a kind of a evolving like the mainstream has been for years, a kind of a nuts and bolts ET things, they get more into more advanced levels of metaphysics, consciousness, awareness at different levels, the paranormal, certain psychic things. Sometimes they develop psychic abilities. They have suddenly precognitions, psychokinesis, or even poltergeist manifestations may erupt after a sighting again and again in many, many different stories that we hear. And sometimes they have, experiences with spirits, ghosts, or whatever. And it seems to be involved with a heightened psychic awareness, and they also develop interest in different religions and have questions about things that they never questioned before. And although they may have had some psychic ability in the beginning, a lot of times maybe after a UFO encounter, it seems to develop even to a greater extent. And I think that the way ufology is evolving, we're getting more awareness about the importance of consciousness and physics in this field, and like you said, it's very hard to pin down. There's so many different aspects to it all, and it's welcome to it's a welcome thing to have people from different disciplines try to look at it and see what kind of thoughts evolve for them, and because we have all these different elements that we really haven't looked at real closely in the past as much as we should. There has been, Jacques Vallée's Passport to Magonia in 1969, which was quite a landmark pioneering work of its own, where he looked at stories of fairies and noticed the comparisons of people seeing fairies and gnomes and leprechauns to little people, the Native Americans too, and John Keel's work, Operation Trojan Horse and Strange Creatures from Time and Space in 1970, about half a century ago now, and yet we are, we're more and more people are still, starting to look at these elements still and noticing how this thing is far more complex and perplexing than just ET coming down and collecting rock samples and poking us with pins and needles. Although I mean, I can't say that's not going on too, but I think that the idea that there is something that's here and been here for a long time, and like we were discussing in a little private conversation we had a few days ago, if it was something that was a threat, an imminent threat, like calling the military, we gotta do something about this. I know that some people are, we've had discussion about the gentleman from the Pentagon and the Nimitz and recent military sightings and how some people are in the military are kind of worried about someone coming in, maybe ETs and we have to protect ourselves. Well, I think we're way past that. But we, everybody has to approach it from whatever their area of specialization is. We need to have people come together and, feel free to agree to disagree. The important thing is that we have dialogue going on and we all look at it, and everybody's perspective may bring to bear some insight, some understanding that someone else from another background might overlook. And we've got to have this multidisciplinary approach. We've got to have the parapsychologists and the cryptozoologists who are willing to dialogue with the UFO researchers. And a lot of times it's, like people don't want to do that. They don't want to cross over into that other field. This is my field. This is my area of specialization. Yours has nothing to do with it. I mean, imagine how many years that has gone on, that someone's investigating a UFO case and the witness says, "Oh, I saw Bigfoot shortly afterwards." Well, that's not my field. You go to a Bigfoot guy and talk to him about that. So
well,
anyway.
It is interesting though, because I think that we are coming closer and closer to sort of sharing and blending modalities than in the past. When you're getting into UFOs and then triggering psychic or intuitive abilities, and then you have to do the step over into, are we alone? Is there reincarnation? And then you hit past lives and reincarnation, and there are scientists out there today that have written books on on near-death experiences about. There's one doctor whose name I can't remember who was clinically dead, and he came back, and he said, "Well, my brain may have been dead, I may have flatlined, but my consciousness was someplace else, and there is someplace else to go." So, it's exciting to think that these people are. Where once they would have hidden in the closet and said, not me, I'm not going out there. Now they're coming out and they're saying, well, let's consider this, let's look at this, let's try to explain this. And I think your book, to get back to your book, is fascinating in that you really do go into a lot of the early reports and and you've linked them to shamans and to some of the ancient fables that ring true in that they are explaining things that are happening today and that they happened hundreds, sometimes thousands of years ago. So that it's kind of interesting. I know you worked. You worked mostly for a while with the South American shamans, and then you've worked with Native American shamans. So what did you find with them? I mean, their belief is profound as to where these people from the stars came from.
Yeah, back in 1975, I was visiting a lady out near Akron, Ohio, little town there, Cuyahoga Falls, and she was an experiencer from going back to the 1950s. She was also part Iroquois Indian, and she was very interested in the shamanic elements, the Native American, as well as many other areas. She had a meditation group that would meet periodically at her home. She had sky watches. So I would go a number of times on weekends to her home because I knew there was going to be all these interesting people to talk with, you know. And there was a wooded area behind her house, and they'd have a bonfire, and people would be gathered around. And so I'd shuffle around with my little reel-to-reel tape recorder and, you know, record some conversation with people. And you know, she had some really cool stories and introduced me to some interesting experiences. And one was she told me about over in Pennsylvania. There was a Native American medicine man who was a Quanahawk Indian. And so I went over to interview him in 76 and 77. We talked on the phone. We had some correspondence. But the second time I went over there, Joan, now my wife, she went with me, and we both went in and talked with him. And he was telling us about the legendary beings in his belief system was the Udushqua, YUHDUSH and the GWA, and he said, you got to say it with guttural. He says, Udushqua. And he says they were the protectors of our people. And he was telling me how they made prayer mounds when he was like 4 years old. They, you know, his elders taught him how to build his first prayer mound. And he was telling me about some of his early psychic, spiritual experiences. And his wife had an envelope that she drew this craft that they called a fire canoe that landed behind their home a few years earlier, and how these beings, these tall beings, the Udushqua, came out of it and entered the house. They had to, you know, lean forward in order to avoid hitting their head on the top of the door frame. And I just found it quite fascinating, and he said that they were E.T. but spirit too, and later on that made me think of like the Hopi Indians and their Kachina, with Ka being respect and China being spirit. And they also, a lot of the elders of the Hopi believe that their spirit, when they evolved to Kachinahood, they live in different worlds. This is the fourth world. They believe they came from the Pleiades. And what's remarkable is there's a book by Frank Waters, The Book of the Hopi, it's called. And in that book, it's not a New Age metaphysical book. It's about the Hopi and their traditions and their beliefs, but in it there's some really remarkable things. The author compares like the Tibetan and Hindus of the East and their belief in these energy centers called the chakras. Well, the Hopis also had a belief in the same energy centers. They didn't call them chakras. They had other names, but there was the solar plexus, the heart, the throat, the forehead, and the crown of the head. And what's interesting is both of them believe that the crown of the head is where consciousness entered the body at birth and exited at death. And all over the world you have beliefs, you know, shamanic groups of people that would use quartz crystals to, you know, to look into people's bodies to do healings and such. And among the Hopi, the medicine men would use these small quartz crystals to look at these 5 energy centers and to see how the person was doing. And they also, you know, with the 7 stars of the Pleiades, they felt there were 7 universes. It was a road of life. Earth is the 4th world that they live in. There's 3 more to go, and then there's 2 more dimensions beyond mortal man's reach, is what the book said. So I just found that all quite intriguing, you know. And of course, it wasn't was back around 1970 that there was a man by the name of Paul Solomon, and of course this is in my book too, who was a contact experiencer, and he went among different Indian reservations, and he would claim he was in contact with these beings, and he would call them down. And one of the places he visited was the Hopi Indians in Arizona, and there were a number of people who, including newspaper people, who had interviewed him and been out and seen some curious, unusual lights appear in the sky when this Paul Solomon was supposed to be in mental contact with him. Uh-huh. And and I remember there was one story of a Hopi around this time who said he had seen a craft, and the outer shell turned invisible, and he could see in the craft as it flew over him, and he could see this human-looking being with long blonde hair at the controls flying over. And so, the Hopi is really really kind of a stellar religion. A lot of things that are very. I know I was talking to a Native American who was Apache. He was an artist, and for a while he lived in our area. He passed away about 2 years ago, but we got to talk with him quite a bit. And he was telling about some of the experiences he had, and he said, just about all these things that would happen to me that were odd, like seeing a spaceship. I was on Hopi land, and he says those Hopi brothers, they're really into the space people.
Right.
But
I think there wasn't the judgment that went on back then that did take place in the 50s and the 60s. And I'm finding that you have the Battle of Los Angeles that was well documented with UFOs that the Army shot at, and the stuff bounced off them and stuff like that. And that was in the 40s, I think. Yeah, that was the 40s. And then you have the Phoenix Lights, which again was another of your major sightings that thousands and thousands of people saw. And then it went crazy, and then everybody and their grandmother was seeing them. There were so many of them. It was kind of hard to tell. And then you had in New York, in the Hudson River area, there was an amazing rash of them for a while. And now you don't see them so much. So
it doesn't reach the papers like it used to, where that was where we detected a lot of our flaps. Right now, just a few days ago, I talked with, did an interview with, along with a couple of my co-hosts, a gentleman down in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Jorge Martin Miranda. And since around January 7th, they had a 6.4 earthquake off the coast, the southeastern, I think, coast of Puerto Rico. And it's in an area, the epicenter, where they had previously had a lot of reports among fishermen and military and police of these offshore sightings of craft going in and out of the water. And there was a long-time belief there about underwater alien base in that area. And ever since that's happened, and apparently this is still an ongoing situation, there have been numerous sightings of craft, some of them quite large, cigar-shaped, metallic-looking craft, no wings, no windows, just solid metallic-looking on the outside, cruising through the skies. And, of course, the spheres and discs and even some triangular-shaped craft. And what's interesting is they've had reports of like these gray beings with the, I think these have been about 5 feet tall, and they've got the big black eyes, pretty typical of what, has been reported here, except instead of grabbing anybody and taking them or having a contact, people just see them around their houses, on their balconies. And when they approach them, the beings seem curious about them, but if the person tries to approach the being, they run off. And this has been going on since this earthquake. Now, he said that about 2 days prior, there was a woman who was a nurse who said that she'd heard something outside. Many times people have been alerted by their dogs. And she went to look out a window and saw these two beings, and with her, they communicated in the head and said mentally that something was going to happen, and that they should, have food and resources on hand, but everything was going to apparently be all right. And then this earthquake hit, and some of them, Jorge said, were kind of worried that there might be further earthquake activity or something. They're just wondering why these beings are, kind of appearing in the ships and the beings, and if they're preparing for something else to happen. What's going on? But they're apparently not that afraid of the activity. It's just concerned about, will there be another earthquake? Is this kind of a warning type thing or whatever?
Well,
and he described how.
Well, I'm glad you're bringing this up because so many people have heard stories about communion. For one thing, that book was frightening to Whitney, and it just, I never got a feeling of fear from any of it, and I'm wondering if the way you react has something to do with your consciousness and let me really go out on the limb here, and your experience with other dimensions and, interdimensional stuff and other worlds and other universes, because lots of times things that we see are kind of like a fold in time, where we are seeing something that happened either in another time frame or in another timeline that is just kind of overlaid ours for a while. I mean, the way we explain what we see, it's like, you explain from your own frame of reference. And these days, our frame of reference is so much vaster than it was 40, 50, 60 years ago or more.
Yeah, it's it is something to try to ponder and figure out what goes on. I mean, some people's experiences are very negative. Some people's are extremely positive. You have the abductee, you have the contactee. Some people start out being very frightened by the experience and feel that they're an abductee, and then later on, someone who's been abused, and then later on they begin to start to feel a positive side to it, and they become a contactee. And then some will say, well, that's kind of like the Stockholm syndrome. They've been abused, and they're just identifying with their abusers. But it seems like there's in all categories, both categories, there seems to be an evolution that happens a lot with they're developing deeper interest in many of the same areas, having increased kind of psychic awareness, and interest in a lot of the same areas, religion and physics or things. Some people become obsessed with trying to build something. They're not sure exactly how or why, but it's like they got a download. They want to create a free energy device or something, or they end up being like the guy in Close Encounters of the Third Eye. He's got that mashed potato and he says this means something, and he's trying to build something. Just later we see it's the Devil's Tower there in Wyoming. He's supposed to go there because the aliens are fixing to make a big contact there with the government. But
Well, yeah, my favorite, one of my favorite movies, by the way. It just, you go through a whole series of belief systems, and being fortunate enough to interview authors on all sorts of different topics. This is one that, of course, I interview as many as I can find, and it's fascinating how people, their belief system, are they aliens from another world, from another planet, from another dimension, or and of late there's been a lot of chatter, so to speak, that while yes, we've been visited and yes, we have downed crafts that we've reverse engineered, but that we've been developing quote unquote spaceships since the 40s, as has Germany, as has Russia, as has Japan or China, and so that a lot of what you see in the night sky when you think you're seeing a UFO, it is a UFO. It's just a matter of, is it made in Japan, China? Did we make it? Is it one of ours? Is it one of theirs? Is it from an alien culture? And you sit back and you think, okay, so someone or thing has been visiting this planet for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But wouldn't you think that their mode of transportation would have changed in those thousands of years? Wouldn't you think that they were no longer needing to have the saucers to fly around? Wouldn't you think they had a better way of transportation since thousands of years ago that's what they were traveling in? Wouldn't you think their models would have changed? They would have evolved over time as we have?
Yeah, and some people I remember I remember back in the 70s an article by Otto Binder, who was an author back then. He since passed away, but he wrote in Saga magazine an article about the airship wave, of like 1896, 97, 1909, 1910, and how we didn't have anything of that development at that time, but that these things were flying over major cities and getting a lot of press. And could it be that maybe sometimes he wondered if maybe they were showing us things that at that time, at that particular level of awareness, we could kind of comprehend, and they could, they knew that we were going to see them, but they had to control maybe, perhaps they wanted to control how it affected us and how we processed that information. And so it goes through different stages. For a long time, these experiences were seen in a spiritual, religious frame of reference. And then it evolved more into, because we're a technological culture now in recent centuries, and so we began to perceive it more in terms of some sort of craft, either a foreign government, or it's a extraterrestrial, or now interdimensional. And during World War II, we had the Foo Fighters there, these little spheres that would appear around bombers and such, and they thought on the enemy side it was our secret weapon, and we thought it was theirs. And then after the war was over, we discovered nobody knows anything about what they were, And when I was talking with a guy in Puerto Rico, he was talking about some of the areas like the rainforest down there, very concentrated activity in recent years, and there are stories going back to the 1930s, and then there's some of the Indians that lived there past centuries that talked about the gods and things that happened to them in those same areas. So he wonders if, again, like we are talking, if this is just an ongoing thing, that went through different frames of reference. And I kind of question as to whether we're clearly seeing, because we're so looking through such a technological lens, and we find all these other bewildering paranormal elements. Like I was just talking, I did an interview with Kathy Martin, who is a hypnotherapist, contact investigator, contact experiencer investigator for MUFON. And she, of course, her aunt was Betty Hill, one of the most famous abductee experiences, her and Barney. And she was telling about a gentleman that she was investigating recently who had all these experiences and at this location out in the American Southwest. And one of them was seeing these like prehistoric creatures, which he saw with his mother as well. And it instantly reminded me like Skinwalker Ranch or an interview I had with Tom Dongo about out near Sedona, Arizona, the Bradshaw Ranch, where they've had all this anomalous stuff, and seeing dinosaurs there. And let's see, with this guy that it was like mammoth elephants on a savanna. Is what she said he saw with his mother. This guy that she investigated, and the Skinwalker Ranch. Well, they've got these Skinwalker things, whatever they are, and of course, Tom Dongo talked a lot about the Skinwalkers with us in an interview because that's out in his territory too. Kind of like shamans who shapeshift or whatever. Bizarre stuff. And he was telling about, Tom Dongo was telling about on the Bradshaw Ranch that he was going to his car to reload his 35 millimeter camera, and Linda Bradshaw, who owned the Bradshaw Ranch, she was screaming at him. They weren't that far apart, maybe 45, 50 feet, and he never heard any of it. And he said he should have. It was like they were isolated in a bubble. She was in her bubble, he was in his. And, he said this is the only time she ever got mad at me. And she finally got his attention, and she says, "Why didn't you answer me?" And he said, "I didn't hear anything." And then she described that she'd seen like these two long-necked, he said they're like 20-foot long neck creatures, dinosaurs. He said, "What would that be?" And I said, "Well, I remember from boyhood that would be like a brontosaurus, the friendly plant eaters." And they were there, and then they disappeared. And there was some child and her mom, I think, another time that had seen something that was a smaller dinosaur running through some brush that had a tail to it. Definitely looked prehistoric. And it's like, what is going on?
I've often wondered if our perception is what our consciousness can deal with. Like 2,000 years ago, there were luminous beings that were quote-unquote angelic, and yet, they perceived them as angelic. And then, of course, Whitney Strieber with his little gray aliens, after he planted that seed, everybody saw little grays all over the place. And I'm wondering if our consciousness is giving us what we can deal with. And, some people like Billy Meyer. He perceives these Nordic-looking people, star people that he talks to, and has talked to for generations. Well, not generations, but decades after decade after decade. And then there are people that swear they've seen reptilians and they've seen ant people and they've seen all. So I'm wondering if it's your level of consciousness, what you are able to accept and embrace, and get whatever information is supposed to come to you through that experience. So that So I might see a normal type person, and you might see a luminous being, and the person next to me isn't seeing anything because they can't cope with that, and that everybody has their own perception as to what a star person or an alien is, and that's what they are able to deal with. So that's what they see.
Yeah, I remember a friend of mine reporting a case. He was working on out in Arizona near an ancient site, and ancient Native American site, and this craft landed, and these beings got out. And he said what was interesting is that everybody saw the beings a little differently. They weren't all the same beings, and yet they were standing right there in front of them, and they all should have been seeing the same thing. And then we have cases kind of like your college experience, where we have people who are really excited or upset. They're seeing what they think is perceive as a craft, and yet there's people standing nearby who don't see a thing. And and the well-known Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, back in the 1950s, he wrote a book, one of his last books really that he wrote on the UFO phenomenon, because he had been quoted inaccurately making a statement, on UFOs for the press, because there were people reporting radar sightings and the Washington D.C. sightings in '52, and there was a lot of excitement. And so somebody in the press asked him what he thought, and the meaning of what he said was actually distorted. Imagine that. So he decided he was going to research it and write a book and give his own opinion. He applied his concept of archetypes of the collective unconscious, but he was mystified as to how do these military pilots see craft and these things are picked up on radar, instead of being like a visionary rumor, it seems to be more complex. And he had an experience because he attended seances at an early age, and studied that experience and became aware of of psychic phenomena, which Sigmund Freud, who wanted to, he thought of himself as a father figure for young and wanted him to follow in his footsteps, and accused him of pursuing the dark arts of the occult. He was at a seance once, and there was a medium there, and there were 4 people who were seeing this globe of light hovering over the abdomen of the psychic medium. Except Jung, who was standing there, he could see nothing. And these other people were clearly very annoyed and disturbed and confused as to why Jung himself, couldn't see what the 4 of them were seeing, And he called it psychoid. He called it a psychoid experience. He knew of a few others, and he wondered if maybe that somehow gave us some clues to the nature of the reality of this phenomenon, although he couldn't quite put it together, but he just wondered, and it's in his book, Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Seen in the Skies, which was written back and published back, I'm going to say about 1959, but, somewhere in that time period. And, it's, and so we have all these very unusual things to pursue, very challenging and perplexing phenomena, like the psychoid factor, like the reflective factor, as Keel called it, or the Oz factor or effect, as Jenny Randles over in England called it. I mean, there's things that seem to be a little outside our reality, a little beyond, why doesn't this make more sense, And you got all these belief systems to contend with. It's almost, sometimes as an investigator and trying to communicate with someone who's got a particular belief system, I almost feel like a politician. I know if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to step in it.
Yeah. Well, it's like, have you ever been in a crop circle?
No, I've not been in a crop circle. I've been at a lot of ancient sacred sites, but never have been in a. Well, wait a minute. I have been in one here in Tennessee, a few years back. I don't know if it was man-made or whatever, but I don't know that really matters. But
I think I think it does matter, because I was fortunate. I was in Virginia a long time ago, and there was a crop circle, and a bunch of us went to investigate it, and it was a very unusual experience, because once you stepped into it, there was a magnetic energy of some sort there. watches stopped, batteries died. There was a feeling almost of there was a feeling of silence that was so profound it was unbelievable. I have ringing in my ears. I've had ringing in my ears as long as I can remember. I kind of like it. But the ringing in my ears stopped. And it was a profound feeling of peace and quiet and solitude that came over every one of us. And it was almost like you were alone in your own, like you explained before, bubble. And you didn't want that to end. It was, and I have found the same feeling in some of the stone chambers that are all over the Northeast here that I've been in. It's a feeling of peace, of being protected, of being embraced by silence. And those are the only times that I can ever remember not having the ringing in my ears, and I still haven't been able to explain it, but it is a phenomena that has fascinated me for years now.
Yeah, that is, and I've heard of things like that, and actually a few years ago, my wife and I were up in Portsmouth, Ohio, and at an ancient Native American site. We were part of a group from the Association for Research and Enlightenment, the Edgar Casey group, out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. And they were sponsoring it, and our good friends, Dr. Greg and Laura Little, who are very much into a lot of this, investigating these ancient sites. Greg even has written an encyclopedia on ancient Indian mounds and earthworks. It's in its second edition, along with other books. He and his wife both have traveled extensively across the country documenting the existence of these sites. And anyway, we went there with a group of several dozen people, and it's up on a hill, the site that we were visiting, that it was what remained. There was actually a lot that has since been destroyed, but there did remain a large effigy U-shaped mound, horseshoe-type shaped mound, a wall that was, I'm going to say, was like maybe 30 feet, 40 feet wide, and maybe about 45, 50 feet back in this playground area. And across the street to our left was a school that was sitting on top of one of the other U-shaped mounds. Originally had been two. And anyway, we got permission from the mayor and his wife while we were there to actually do some drumming, meditation work in this huge earthwork, this horseshoe-shaped earthwork, which the opening faced toward the Ohio River, so toward the south. I'm going to say roughly the south, anyway. And so we went in there and we were smudging. We had sage, and Joan and I were smudging the walls and the interior, getting ready for the group that was in a building nearby where there was a Native American artist who was showing a lot of his paintings and what they meant to him. And so we were getting ready for the people to come up, and we were going to smudge them. But first we were going to smudge the area. And suddenly we realized, oops, to do this properly, we should have known better to smudge ourselves before we went around smudging the site,
Yeah.
So I said, okay, well, let's grab our foot-long feather we had and start smudging each other. The thing was, it had been on this little blanket we had on the ground, and it wasn't there. So we looked around. We couldn't find it, so we decided we're just going to have to smudge by hand. And, we had the little smudge stick, and we were using our hands. She smudged me. I smudged her. And then when we got done, it was back on the blanket. So I said, well, I'm I'm going to go ahead and grab my tape recorder and record what just happened. And so I did. And, well, there was someone who was mowing a yard nearby. There was traffic. There was a helicopter that had been flying overhead. And on the recording, you can barely hear me, and I'm right there by the recorder, and my wife's maybe 2 feet from me talking to me, but you can't hear what she's saying. You only hear me. It's but I wouldn't think so much about it, except later on, everybody gathers in there and forms a circle around us, and I do a talk, and everybody talks about how they can hardly hear me unless I'm looking right at them, because it's like the sound is depressed. And yet people were sensing like a vibration from the earth, having like visions of like a ball of light or something, and two people described having like past life memories as Native Americans. And then later on we go downtown to a restaurant about a mile away down at the bottom of the hill, and we're having lunch, and the mayor's wife, who hadn't participated in this with us, is sitting about 2.5, 3 feet across the table. This is a long table, and she happens to sit directly across from my wife. And they get to talking. And I find out about a week later when I'm talking to the mayor's wife on the phone, and she says, I really didn't know what happened, but says as Joan was talking to me, all of a sudden, it was like everything got real quiet, and I could hardly hear her, And she thought, am I having a panic attack or what? This has never happened to me before.
Is my hearing going? Yes.
Yeah. Again, the sound was depressed, and they were talking. They were talking about when they were young and went to church, and she happened to tell a story about how there was a church that she had been to as a child that burned down. And so anyway, as I'm talking to her on the phone, she says, and by the way, since then, there was another church from my younger years that also just recently burned down since all that. And I found it interesting because that night after we'd done this, I woke up in the night and I saw these like blue flames. And they were sort of like in a ring, like with a stove that operates on gas. And I never have found out what caused the fire at the church, but I've kind of wondered, And I even got up and went into the bathroom, and because I had seen like this, I think a shaman's face dressed up, in ceremonial face mask. And I said, look, I don't want any misunderstanding. What we're doing is just giving people a taste of, respectfully, of what an authentic ceremonial event would consist of. We're not trying to take over anybody's job here. I was starting to get a little worried, but it was just kind of a series of odd things, and there was that silence, that was a part of it.
To me, it was very comforting.
Yeah, I talked to, I communicated a little with another woman who had been told about what happened to us, and she was Native American, and she used to work at this site, and she had told me that what you guys experienced, other people have experienced there too. She said, I assure you, everything's okay. But people had seen balls of light previously, we were told, around this big U-shaped mound. And around that area, other people had unusual paranormal experiences. There had even been some people who were ghost hunters who had visited the site, which I understand they were kind of frightened away. I don't think their approach was quite the right one for an ancient Native American ceremonial site. But anyway,
probably not.
No.
Well,
Anyway.
I think it's how you interpret those things. They could interpret them from their frame of reference, from what they do, is that, oh my God, it's haunted, and then other people, it's like, this is the energy of this space, and we're welcoming the elders in, and this is nothing to be frightened of. This is an honor. So, yeah, I would hope they had been frightened away. They might have tried to exorcise it and found that there are certain things you can't exercise.
Yeah, and for us, we'd had on this trip, we'd visited a number of sites, a number of people that had not just this site but other ones, experiences where it seemed like Native American presence was there. I remember this one woman who was an ARE librarian pulled me aside toward, I think one of the last sites that we had visited. It was over a weekend, and she said, I don't know if you know this, but in case you don't, she says, when you do these ceremonies and you call them in, she says, they really do come. And she describes seeing these little dark figures, a little over 5 feet tall, that kind of gathered around us while we were doing a meditation with a drum and a rattling with rattles, I believe. And we also had the pre-Columbian Peruvian whistling vessels too. And so there were some people that had some pretty amazing stories to share with us. And
definitely.
But you mentioned.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, but you mentioned about the kind of like the silence and being like in a bubble. That kind of reminded me of the Portsmouth episode there.
You just mentioned something else that I wanted. It's a field I've been playing with and investigating for decades, over half a century actually. And you hit on one thing that I've not run across: the Peruvian whistling vessels. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, I had heard of them before from this lady up in Ohio that introduced me to the medicine man, who was also a contactee, but also she had been kind of interested in them. She had lots of interests in many things. It was always fun to talk with her, but it was a Native American practitioner down in Alabama who's mentioned in Visitors from Hidden Realms, Wanda Dove Tice, who is part Cherokee, part Choctaw, and she was at an event in Tennessee with a group that was doing a meditation atop a flat-top Indian mound. And we're not really sure where this was. It was back in 1987 during the harmonic convergence, as they called it,
yes.
based on Central American cosmology. And anyway, somebody had brought these Peruvian whistling vessels. They're pre-Columbian, or they're replicas of pre-Columbian effigy whistles. The kind that I have and probably we used at this event were the 2-chamber ones, effigy, and they may have the figure of a person on the front. One has like the hands clasped in front of them, and their eyes looks like they're praying or in meditation. Some have may have figures like a bird or a fish, which some people believe represents maybe the bird, the upper world, and the fish maybe the underworld. The shamanic traditions worldwide often describe like a 3-world concept: the upper world, angels, higher spirits, heaven, and the middle world where we are, which could also have other intrusions from, say, ghosts and spirits, and then the underworld, which could also have some sort of underworld type spirits. And so anyway, they were blowing these whistles, and she was in a circle with a group on top of the mound having a meditation, and she said that she was seeing herself down at Machu Picchu in Peru, And it was like she herself in a past life was a star visitor. And she, as well as others, had allowed their ego to get the best of them, and the ship was leaving without them. And she was being left behind and feeling very bad about that. And she said that she saw herself in a robe and like I think like a gold disc around her solar plexus, and she could feel this vibration around her solar plexus. And then she overheard some of the other people describing how they were having similar experiences. And she thought, wait a minute, this is supposed to be my vision. Why are they describing the same thing? So that's why she got interested in the whistles. And so I invited a lady who, Benita Luz, who's also described in the book, who was a psychotherapist, and she spent over a year down in Peru. And she brought, she did a talk for us, and she brought a set of these whistles, which are replicas of these pre-Columbian Peruvian whistles of the Chimu culture, the ones that she had. There were other ones too, like the Vicus culture and others. And originally, I think this tradition with these whistles went back like 2,500 years. They've been able to trace it, and it wasn't originally actually from Peru. It kind of came down, I think, from Colombia through Ecuador into Peru over the centuries. And but people have found the whistles to have like healing qualities, generating visions sometimes, people actually seeing like into the past. And I took a set of 7 whistles over to my friend Greg Little's home over in Memphis, Tennessee, back about 2006. And he had a guest, well-known author and historian, Andrew Collins. And we all went out on a pontoon, and it was toward the evening, and we had the whistles, and we started blowing them. And 4 of us, Greg Little, Andrew Collins, myself, and a gentleman named Jim, who was as I recall, is kind of a landscaping guy who lives in Memphis also, we all had this visual thing of seeing like a spinning vortex. And what was interesting, I inquired as to which way was yours going, which way was yours, and all 4 of us saw it going in the same direction. And Andrew got excited, and he said, this is like a shamanic tool that you could actually use. You need to get a group together and do this and see about going down the portal there, the vortex, and seeing where you go, and then see where you could, like, I think he said, like, spin off into some other direction and do explorations into this altered state and see where it takes you. Which I really haven't found a group that I, felt could work with on that. But I've given talks and demonstrations, some workshops on it, and it's interesting the experiences people have. Some it's like an out-of-the-body experience. One woman that I just did an interview with last night from the Nashville area, Kathy Brockway, she was one of 2 other people that I had blowing the whistles one time. And people were describing kind of like mandala-type images, and, with, when they were blowing the whistles, and they were kind of similar. But what happened with her is, and it kind of made me feel like, okay, I got to be cautious with this thing with some people, because she didn't, after that, we all went around and talked with other people and just kind of relaxed, and she left about an hour later. And as she described in the interview we did last night, which should come out on our website on the 1st of April, along with other interviews, she said that as she got close to her home, everything started to shift around. Like the house would be one location, and then it would move over to the left or suddenly to the right, and other things, it's like shifting around. And as she pulled into her driveway, she was like keeping her fingers crossed that she would hit the driveway instead of the lawn or something, or the mailbox. And she said she'd never had an experience like that. It was. But what was interesting is we were at the home of Sandy Nichols in Thompson Station, who claims to be an alien experiencer, and he walked her to her car before she left, and he said on the other side of her vehicle before she left there was a small gray being, and then it disappeared. But it's hard to tell if this is, how this may connect exactly with her experience. But anyway, it was curious, and then as we talked about it, I said, and then there was another experience that Sandy told me you had, which wasn't too long after that, where you come home with groceries, and the driveway was empty, and you had plenty of room to swing your car door open and take your groceries in. And she was surprised when she got in with the groceries, and there was her husband at the top of the stairs. And she says, "Where's your car?" And he says, "It's out in the driveway." She put the groceries down, went out, and there was his car. And she couldn't figure out, because she'd just been there and the car wasn't there. So shifting realities or alternate realities or what,
Lucky for her, she didn't park on top of him. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were talking about drumming, were you utilizing a particular rhythm?
Generally, I would just kind of a slow, maybe slow beat, maybe kind of like a heartbeat, and then toward the conclusion of it, I would just kind of give it a few extra speeded up licks to kind of bring everybody back to normal state of consciousness.
Because the reason I asked is I had a shaman here that was teaching drumming. And this was hand drumming, not thumping. Not meaning to diminish thumping, just to differentiate between using your hands and using a thumper.
Yeah.
And she taught the paradiddle. Are you familiar with that?
No.
It's if you were using your hands on it, it would be left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, and it's called the paradiddle. It's a fundamental drumming technique that drummers who are going to be in rock bands and everything that learn, but it's ancient, and what it does is, first of all, it balances the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and then it takes you further if you're ready to go further. And it's I have found it, as it was taught, you can do this with your hands on your legs, you can do it on the tabletop, you can do it any number of places and ways, but it balances the left and right hemisphere, and then it calms you down. It eases tension. And the further you take it, the more relaxed you get. And, if you weren't using hand drums, so it wouldn't have been something that you would have utilized. But it's been done in the Peace Chamber at the top of Mount Washington with drummers that have gotten together. And at midnight they go out and they use this paradiddle and they raise the energy with it. And oftentimes there are people who see things or feel things or experience things.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a couple of those. I think it's the same thing what you're describing, these big chambers that are, I think, underground where people can go in and do chants, vocalizations, and drummings or whatever. That sounds like a neat experience.
The chamber they go into is beneath ground, but it's like the basement of a huge tower. So it absolutely uses it as though it's broadcasting, to the hotel that's nearby and everything else. And you don't have to even be in the chamber to feel it, because it emanates out from it profoundly. And it's an amazing experience and anybody can do it. And depending on, if it's quiet where you are, and if you're just tapping on the table and you shut your eyes, it does take you somewhere. And where it takes you, I guess, depends on where you need to go inside of yourself. But it is an amazing form of meditation. Just curious.
Well, with
paradiddle.
With the whistles, we we would blow several of them together, and it's, some people believe it's kind of like a binaural beat, like what Robert Monroe of the Monroe Institute in Virginia had created years ago for doing astral projection, for entering other states of consciousness. And you got, coming into one ear, you got one frequency, and in the other ear another, and then a third one is created from the combination of those two, or even just the high frequency harmonic frequencies could also do it. I know that the gentleman who first discovered the psychoacoustical qualities, as he called them, of these whistles back in 1972, a gentleman over in Pennsylvania, he was just blowing the one whistle, and suddenly he found himself out of his body, like he was traveling through space, and he was a light being. And then he approached this dark cloud, and he thought, oh no, he just dreaded. He knew that this wasn't good. He didn't want to go into it, but he didn't know what to do. But as soon as he hit this dark cloud, it suddenly thrust him back into his body, and he came to, and he had sweat, around his body. And he had this vessel still in his hands, in his lap, and this is what sent him on his quest and started this whole movement with the Peruvian whistles. He realized that this was some sort of ancient tool. He never had been interested in any of this before. His wife at the time was not too happy about this, this shift in his interest. He had bought this at an auction.
Is this similar to the solfeggio music that's out there? That is, it's a harmonic that is at certain different hertzes, depending on whether you're healing or whether you're going into intuition and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a very high frequency harmonic sounds. It may be up to 2,000 or more hertz, and I think there was even a guy that this Don Wright, who was making them some years back out in Silver City, New Mexico, who's a psychotherapist, and I got 4 whistles from him a few years back, and he was saying there was a medical doctor that wanted to get a set from him for helping people with certain conditions. So there's an interest in the healing qualities. There's an interest in with many people how it affects consciousness, and it's always really kind of neat to take this and to a group who's never experienced it before, and see what happens. Some people kind of get addicted to it. Hey, I want to do this again, because their first experience was so profound. And Jonathan Goldman, who is a well-known sound therapist out in Colorado, he's written a number of books, and each year he does about a week-long sound therapy class with people who want to sign up, and they spend about a week there in Colorado at a certain place. I think it's a Buddhist colony, and he gets them in there, and they do the different tones. They do chanting. They do bells and whistles and so on. And he told me that they saved the Peruvian whistles for last because he said it is such a powerful instrument that sometimes people need a little advanced preparation to lead up to it. Whereas I have just been, bam, here it is, people. I didn't know any better, but anyway. But that just kind of gives you an idea it's the power of this thing. And I've got a few years ago. I maybe send you the link sometime. And I remember one gentleman, Brent Oldham. He had a pretty profound experience. And I did a video of his description of it. And it's interesting. It's like people sometimes enter another dimension. I remember one guy said that it was like he had gone to Machu. Well, he had gone somewhere down in Peru, and I think it was Lake Titicaca. He felt it was, where he came up out of the water, and then he was down by the Nazca Plains. The lines on the Nazca lines. They have the spider and the monkey and all those things, and he had an explanation for that. He said that what he learned was in this vision that this guy described. His name is Tony Pratt. He lives up in Nashville, and he said that in order to detect when they were teaching young people to go out of their bodies, one way to find out if their experience was authentic is to have them go up in the air and look down and describe these lines and see if they could accurately describe what was there. And so they would know from that, because they knew what was there, but they wanted to see if the young trainee, was either imagining what was there or he was actually successfully going out of his body. And, I don't know, but I just thought that was kind of cool, yeah.
Well, there's so much, there is so much material and so much experiential material connected to the energies that can be opened up in the human condition. And I describe it often as, our spirit is riding in this vehicle, and most people treat it like a Volkswagen, and then other people take the time to find out where all the bells and whistles are and have an amazing trip. and I think that one of the things that the UFO experiences or otherworldly experiences or near-death experiences teach us is that there is so much more, and there is such a greater potential in the vehicle in which our spirit is riding, and being able to be telekinetic, being able to be telepathic, being able to be clairsentient, and all the clairs. It is potential that is there for all of us if we have the desire and the courage to do the work to find it.
Yeah, and you go into your mind and you meditate or you pray, and sometimes you're going through a existential crisis, and you're not sure if you're going to push the right buttons or not. Sometimes you just have to venture forth with the faith that, hey, I may have told you, but back in '75, I was going through a kind of existential crisis myself. I had, accepted Christ, and I thought, hey, this is great. Then I had people saying, well, have you been baptized in water? If not, you may not be saved. And I felt like I was doing all right. And then someone told me, well, have you spoken in tongues? Have you been baptized in the Spirit? What's that? Well, come to my little gathering. We're not mainstream. We're a little private, and that kind of scared me. I had a little, I had a little bubble on my forehead at the time, a little lump there, and I just figured, it's not anything serious. It eventually went away, but he was trying to tell me it was an evil spirit, started to pray for me and put his hand on my forehead. So anyway, I decided, hey, God, Creator, whatever I should call you, could you give me some kind of vision that'll help me understand this, what this is, and the spirit, what spirit is, and some kind of insight where, but I don't want it to be anything to scare me, because some of that stuff gets pretty. So 2 nights later, I'm crawling into bed, and bam! Suddenly, it's like I'm on my feet again. Although in hindsight, I don't remember my feet actually touching the floor. But the light was off in my bedroom. It's like a long room, I guess maybe 20 feet long from where my bed was over to the door that led out into the hallway. The hallway light was on. My father was in the bathroom making his last-minute pit stop, so this didn't last long. And I'm going toward the door, and suddenly I'm about halfway across the room, and I stop. But my focus the entire time is on that doorway. And it occurs to me that someone is standing behind me, and they're just keeping me where I'm at. Now, normal state of consciousness, I would question, I might be rather disturbed that someone was behind me, holding me back, even though I didn't remember feeling a hand on the shoulder or anything like that. No feeling, and no fear, absolutely no fear. This is like watching a fly walk across the wall there,
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, there's all these tiny little pulsating, clear white, beautiful like balls of light swarming around. And it seemed like they come like down from the ceiling and going down toward the floor, and they seem to be coming together on the floor, near the floor, on the right side of the door, and taking the form of like a 4-legged animal. But before it had completed, all of a sudden, I was back in my bed, laying on the bed, looking up at the ceiling, which is kind of odd because whenever I go to bed, I go down, I lay on my stomach or on my side, and here I was just laying on my back looking at the ceiling. So that was the experience, but as I thought about it over and over, I thought, well, it showed that there was like an intelligence. It could exist in many forms, but it could also come together. It was part of nature. It was part of nature and us and the highest. It was light, it was energy, but it had purpose, like intelligent design, I guess you could say. And so I felt it was the answer, and I also felt it was connected with, my need for an answer and a need for it not to scare me. So I felt like I was a part of this, and we're all a part of this, and I felt like that was my little answer,
Well, that was a great answer. It didn't overwhelm you. It just let you know you were fine.
Yeah, and so I did get baptized later in water, but spirit, maybe that was the baptism of the spirit there,
Well,
but I felt
I would say so. I'm ordained in a spiritual church, and their form of baptism is not with water but with flowers. And I think whatever works for you is most appropriate. I understand with Judeo-Christian belief systems that water is the way to go, but no matter how it happens to you, if it's profound, it has the same effect that someone who has been dunked by John the Baptist is going to have, so long as there is that surrender internally to spirit and understanding that there is a greater force out there.
Yeah, I can accept that. I like that.
Yeah, that's my belief today.
Yeah, and around that time in '75, there was, I'd been traveling across the country a lot, interviewing people, and I know when I come back, some of my one of my Christian friends had said, did this strengthen your Christian belief? Was it evil? And I said, actually, I met some really nice people, and some of them I felt was, kind of on a elevated spiritual level, which I found out later that person had said something to my dad that indicated she was a little worried about me. It's a journey for all of us, and I believe that a lot of these experiences are going through a spiritual journey. Many of them. In fact, a number of people have said being an investigator of UFOs and these unexplained phenomena is kind of like being on a spiritual journey in one's life.
Oh, yeah.
I may not go to... Go ahead.
Well, wisdom is never a bad thing to gather. And, if something can't withstand tests and questions, then it's not authentic, in my opinion. So that I'm sure that you have met people that have been unbelievably spiritually oriented. That to be spiritually oriented doesn't mean you have a white robe on and you go to the mountaintop. It means that you're open to learn and to grow.
Mhm. And
go ahead.
I think that like, and this was covered in my book Visitors, that there was one story that I had read where after the Vietnam War, there were these Vietnamese who were relocated in the U.S. They were a group called, it was spelled HMONG, so Hyom or whatever, but that there were suddenly dozens of these young, healthy young men from this Vietnamese group who were dying in their sleep. Our medical doctors were mystified, didn't know how to treat this, and so, for a while, it was something that was going untreated, and the deaths were still occurring. And these people, like 50, 60%, had at least one, what they call an old hag type experience. They would find this, and this occurs in other groups of people, they call it a hagging. This being would sit on their chest and kind of like be suffocating them. They'd wake up and this being, maybe this old hag, as they call it, maybe an old woman would be sitting on their chest and they'd be suffocating. And the Vietnamese called it a dab tsog, D-A-B and then T-S-O-G. And I, forget my pronunciation, that's the spelling anyway. And and so this was going on with this group of people. And then they reconnected with some of their other people, and some that had shamanic practitioners among the group, and they reintroduced them to that part of the culture. And these unexplained sleeping deaths began to significantly decrease, whereas nothing else had been able to help them. And so, you kind of see this in other people, that certain people of certain backgrounds embrace a certain tradition or reality, spiritual reality, archetypal reality, whatever you want to call it, and it becomes not only a part of their beliefs, but it affects them at a deep psychic, physical, sometimes deeply psychological level. And in other groups of other cultures, you've got all these traditions with shapeshifters and some of this elements of even like witchcraft. And if you don't follow the recipe for dealing with some of those things, disaster can strike. You can protect yourself if you know what to do. And then other people in that area who aren't of that background, that tradition, a lot of times are said not to be affected if they see one of these apparitions. But if you're one of the people of that particular group or tribe, it can affect you. And I just thought that was kind of interesting, how a group consciousness type thing, is involved. And I know when we did a recent interview with Tom Dongo out in, Sedona, Arizona, and all those experiences going on in the Skinwalkers, he said that for a long time, this was just something among certain Native American, groups out there that were practicing this, and only Native Americans were affected. But then he said recently these events have started to occur outside of their areas, out into even down the street from where he lives in Cottonwood now, And he said he's had several sightings down there. He says, "What's going on?" So it's like maybe sometimes as we become more aware of what's happening in other groups, that maybe there's that bubble effect. They're originally isolated, but then we become exposed to that same energy field, and so we have to learn about it and how to maybe interact with it.
Isn't this sort of like voodoo? Definitely.
Voodoo, witchcraft, things that really, because some of the stuff is really quite evil, Some of it is not good. They, curses and things, and someone hopes to gain power over someone else or something.
And just having the belief in, that's what faith healing is too. You believe that this person has the power to heal you, ergo you become healed. Your body replicates, what you believe this person can do.
Mhm.
It is profound what our energetics can create if we have a belief in them. I'm not so sure about walking on water, though I do that. It has to be frozen, but, I can walk on water.
Yeah.
So haven't quite gotten to the person who is the practitioner has to have total faith and belief in what they're doing, as well as the person that is being practiced upon. So, but there are healers all over the world that people have such a belief in them that there are spontaneous reversals of amazing conditions that medical doctors have said, you're toast, kid, and they come back healed. So it's amazing.
Yeah, many of our experiences. Contact.
No explanation.
Yeah, they've described, and a lot of your people have had spiritual, psychic experiences, and I think the thing with the shamans, it's and psychic mediums, they're a variation of what the contact experiences are going through, and so I think it's a study in, as I said, the consciousness, the physics of all this, and how it may be interrelated. In my book, Rosemary Ellen Galley wrote a foreword, and she felt that, John Keel often looked at the experiences he investigated as being kind of wired differently, and she remarked that she felt that Keel himself was wired differently too, although he never said so, And it was interesting to me that in November 2018, that I was reading about these two medical doctors who had spoken at Harvard Medical School about a study they were doing, and they were using MRIs to study the brains of experiences who were seeing orbs and having like psychic conversations, hit by beams of light. And so they were studying their brains with MRIs, and I just thought it was quite intriguing. I wrote to one of them. He was Dr. Gary Nolan, who works out of Stanford, has a place called Nolan Lab, and he's working with Dr. Christopher Kit Green. And I didn't put all this together at first, but Kit Green was with the CIA Weird Desk back in 1972, and he studied Uri Geller. He was part of the kind of a watchdog over the program that was going at Stanford and I guess elsewhere too. And I think that some of what happened, that he witnessed with Uri Geller and was happening to all these other scientists, got him really interested in these stories of people being hit by beams of light and other psychic interactions and orbs or UFOs or UAPs, that we call them now. And so he's still ongoing with this, and having the help of this Gary Nolan, and they're doing MRIs and medical workups, and they believe that, again, these people are just kind of wired differently, and it makes them more somehow aware. And I've been thinking for decades it would be so fascinating if, we have people who are experiencers and having these kind of things that are happening, and the brain is an area that's not really been probed sufficiently, because MRIs are extremely expensive. But fortunately, his two gentlemen have worked together, and this Gary Nolan has a lab, and they've managed to do some studies with this, and have access to some equipment. And so I just found that interesting. They're planning to do an article in a journal. Apparently, they have a little over 100 experiences, and then they had people who are non-experiencers or said they weren't, and they could look at the differences in the brain, and there's a certain structure in the brain that seems to have more of a neuronal size to it than a non-experiencer. And I've already been aware that, like, some people who enter altered states quite a bit, hypnotic suggestibility, or like Albert Einstein or Edgar Cayce, reportedly had larger corpus callosums that unite the left and right brain hemisphere together. And they say if you meditate a lot, your brain hemispheres begin to work together. You're not just so dominant in the left hemisphere. You actually develop more of an exchange between the hemispheres. And this is what both Edgar Cayce and Albert Einstein, a lot of people may not know it, but Albert Einstein used to kind of use visualization to work out some of his great ideas and theories, and so I just kind of...
Didn't somebody preserve his brain, though, in a jar or something, and they did find that, you used the medical term for it, but the creases were deeper in his brain than with most people?
Yeah, I think it's in a museum over in Pennsylvania. I think they got slices of his brain, something he agreed to, I guess, before he passed away. I hope so.
Hope they put it to pass.
Yeah. But I kind of wondered about, like, Nikola Tesla, too. I mean, he was having some incredible mental skills that he utilized.
Oh gosh,
he could visualize something, and then create it without putting it all on paper.
Yeah. He was also, I don't know what the right word is, a unique, bizarre person. He had unusual proclivities as far as, eating the same thing at the same time in the same place with the same setting and everything like that. And he befriended pigeons here and there, and yet a brilliant, brilliant man. And I've always thought and believed that he was murdered, but no way to prove that now for sure. But a lot of his notebooks are missing, and that there's got to be a reason for it. And they're now using Tesla energy in a lot of places that they'd never used it before now.
Yeah, and I understand that when he passed, that his apartment in New York City, that I believe it was the FBI came in and gathered up all his paperwork, notes and files that he had in his apartment, and confiscated them. And yeah.
Actually,
so
they had rooms right down the hall from him. I think it took a couple of days for his death to actually be reported, and by then he was cleaned out. So it's what an amazing man. I would have loved to have met him. He was so unusual. But all all he wanted to do was to help humanity and give them free energy, and look at what we did to him.
Yeah, there were people who had other plans in the works, and he when he was young, he had these series of he was bedridden with like this illness that involved these bright flashes of light, and I think that if in the right culture, say Native American, I think they would have probably said, "This is a gifted one. We need to make him a shaman," you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But you know, it was not from that particular culture. But he became a brilliant scientist instead, and it's too bad that we, to the date, you know, we come to the school system, and a lot of people say, you know, I went to school and all I heard was like Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein. No one ever talked about Nikola Tesla. This, you know, and then they find out about him all these years later, you know, maybe on Ancient Aliens or something on TV, and they start reading up on.
Well, yeah, but you know, he did. I mean, the Tesla energy is being used in a lot of new and different ways. It's free energy. It's free fuel. It's and here was a man who, you know, when who was it, Ford or somebody said to him, "How do I charge for it?" And he said, "Oh, you don't charge. It's free." That absolutely sealed his doom. You know, and it's too bad, because you know we could all be experiencing a lot richer realities if the electricity was free and we had that extra money that was kind of jingling in our pockets, for sure. But
yeah, I know there's a lot of people trying to reconstruct with what information they have some of his experiments, and somebody has all that detailed information, I guess, somewhere, but it's not out in the civilian realm.
No.
That information is available.
It really is a shame that there have been so many inventions and so many people out there that were trying to give things away for free that have been shut down, whether it was a cancer cure or my dad was in the FBI during World War II, and he saw a demonstration of a tablet. I don't know what it was, but they filled a car, brand new car. They filled a car, the gas tank, with water. They dropped this tablet in, and the car drove like no tomorrow, with no emissions. And it was something the government had bought. And although I would have thought they would have utilized it during wartime, but they did not. And you know, he often talked about that. He said he wondered why that wasn't well, obviously the reason why it wasn't brought out is that, you know, our major oil companies and coal companies and everything would have been out of business. But he talked about that frequently later on in life, that he often wondered what the world would have become had that been available, and apparently it was readily available at the time. He saw it was someplace near Washington, D.C., where he saw it demonstrated. He was one of the agents that was there. And, of course, he signed a paper that said he'd never talk about it.
Oh, me. Well, I just spoke a few weeks ago on the phone with an Ed Young, who said he retired from Stanford some years back. In fact, he worked there when you know, Tog and Harari and all of them were doing their remote viewing studies and so on. He said he worked in the poor man's lab because he didn't have CIA grants, but he said that he created a device that could detect psychic energy. He even told how Harold Sherman visited him in his office one day. And anyway, he said that he did about 2,000 experiments, and they wrote an article up about this for a prominent journal, scientific journal. And the editor turned around and said, this just can't possibly be, so I'm not going to print it, and turned it down. And he said, well, I've already done 2,000 experiments. He said, no, there's no way this thing could work. No, we're not going to publish it. He wanted it published so that other scientists could either replicate his experiments, or, someone prove him wrong.
Expand upon them. Yeah.
Wow. But that didn't happen. And he said he learned at that point that science is not what it's supposed to be. He said that some of these conspiracy stories you hear about suppressing new discoveries, he said, I'm afraid it's true.
Yeah.
He said his dad had tried to tell him years ago that was the case, and he said, I didn't believe it, but I had to get 2 PhDs and apply myself to study. He said, I thought if I could find this out, get it out there, the fruits of my hard labors, my work would be recognized, and, it would go public. And he said it didn't happen.
No. But happily there are people like you that are out there and whispering, the facts out there, and that's what's so great about podcasts and things like that. We can put out information out there for people to either believe or not. But what I love about being able to do shows like this is that you plant seeds, and
right.
In 99% of the time, they take root and they grow. And, better than standing on a platform in a university, these shows that are out there on the Internet and floating on the ether will be picked up for generations. And people will either laugh at us or grow from us, but at least we will have made a difference.
Yeah, and I don't know what all the answers are, but I'm just looking, and I'm like you. I'm interacting with different people and trying to look at the different facets, the different aspects, and somewhere along the line there may be a brilliant physicist come along and say, yeah, I heard Barbara DeLong and Brent Raynes talking about it, and that's it. I'm gonna pull it.
Either that or tomorrow there will be a knock on both of our doors, and there'll be men in black there wanting to take us away.
Well,
but either way, it's out there.
Yes, it's out there. As long as it's not the guys with the straight jacket. Yeah,
either men in black or men in white. Either way, run like heck.
Yep, absolutely.
I just noticed the time, and we are cranking down there. Want to give out your website and where people can find your books and can find you.
Okay. Well, Brent Raynes again. I edit Alternate Perceptions Online magazine, which I started back in 1985 as a print publication, but now it's online monthly, comes out the first of each month at apmagazine.info. Again, that's apmagazine.info. And we always have audio interviews, sometimes print interviews, but mostly audio. And we have book reviews and various columns and features of articles that people submit to us, and covering a variety of things from UFOs, paranormal, cryptids, ancient history. We try to cover anything that's an alternate perception. So anyway, my book, John A. Keel, The Man, the Myth, and the Ongoing Mysteries, just came out back in July. It's available on Amazon, and we discussed tonight my first book, 2004, Visitors from Hidden Realms, which was published back, by Eagle Wing Publishing in Memphis, back in Memphis, Tennessee, back in 2004, and then in 2009, I had Tim Beckley published my book, On the Edge of Reality, which was a book pretty much of a lot of people from different fields. There was Native American, there was various areas of science, study of paranormal, the UFOs. A lot of people I had interviewed over the years, and we put it all in this book. And so that's it for right now, until I maybe write another book.
And I'm sure you will. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight and talking about all of this material. I'm sure that there are people out there that will have questions. And so If they send them in, I will forward them on to you. And thank you so much again for being so generous with your time and your energy and your wisdom.
Well, thank you, Barbara. I know you're applying your time and energy and wisdom, and I always enjoy talking with you and Mark, and you know, it's always a lot of fun. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you again, and thank you everybody for listening and paying attention and sharing your time with us. We so greatly appreciate it. Good night now.